Welcome to the Full-Time Drones Podcast, the show where we take a deep dive into the world of unmanned aerial vehicles and explore their many applications. We'll be speaking with experts and innovators in the field to discuss topics such as drone regulations, emerging technologies, and exciting new applications for UAVs. We will focus our discussions on the current and future opportunities for full-time work in the space. We'll also be featuring stories from drone pilots and operators around the world, sharing their experiences and perspectives on this rapidly evolving industry. So sit back, strap on your headset, and get ready to take flight with us on the Full-Time Drones Podcast. All right, so hey guys, welcome back to the Full-Time Drones Podcast. I am Kyle, I'm your host for this season, and I've got a really exciting guest today. I actually met him a couple years ago, a couple guys that I was working with on a software platform, and more specifically an AI software that we were hoping would do some real-time anomaly detection and also help on the post-processing side. So we met Eric through just a mutual connection and had a lot of conversations about it because they were light years ahead of everybody else in the industry doing drone inspections. And so got a lot of really good feedback from him. It helped us kind of narrow down everything that we were doing to people who were actually using it in the field. And so that was kind of how we met. And we've just kind of kept in touch throughout the years. So, Eric, welcome. And if you want, introduce yourself to the listeners.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me, Kyle. My name is Eric Bitsko. I'm the Director of Electric Utilities for Fermatech. Been utilizing drones in the utility space since about early 2015, the Section 333 days. I've done a little bit of everything in the utility space anyways. Started off the program with just me, myself, and I, and kind of grew that to a 30-plus pilot kind of program there at the largest co-op in Texas. I guess technically the nation too. And then jumped shipped about a year or two ago over to Fermatech and stood up the electric utility vertical and kind of taking the knowledge base that I built with Pernalis and kind of spreading that to other co-ops and utilities around the U.S. and North America. And we're starting to look at some overseas stuff as well. So exciting stuff on the horizon.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. So what is your background? Is your background utility based or is it drone based? And if it's utility based, did you pick up drones before you incorporated it, or how did that all come about?
Yeah, so I'm a journeyman lineman by trade. I started off in construction, kind of got bored of putting sticks in the ground and wire on sticks, and started moving into more of the technical roles with like equipment maintenance, caps, regs, reclosers, SCADA controlled equipment. That eventually parlayed off into like logic and schema for distribution automation. Kind of refined some of the maintenance programs that we had there from kind of time-based to more data-based, which kind of was the foundation of using data to make better business decisions, right? Had a partner of mine that I was working with at the time. He had a Phantom 2, and we were sitting around the back porch and, drinking beer, cussing and discussing, trying to figure out how we can use this at work. And in early May, we had 500-year floodplains hit and washed out a lot of the river crossings. So our initial use case was flying pool line back in 2015. So we took a Phantom 2 and tied some jet line onto it and flew it across a flooded river, and it worked. So we rinsed and repeated. We did that about 6 or 7 times that year. And then kind of went back to the drawing board and like, okay, that was a great use case for that specific kind of disaster response, if you will. But how do we incorporate this into more day-to-day inspections and how can we use the tool to better augment what our current workflows look like? And that kind of is what kicked it all off. Kind of covered a lot of lessons learned. Like we kind of touched on earlier, we started off, 100 AGL above the poles, taking videos with the poles looking, this tiny in the video and trying to pause it and zoom in on the GoPro video. And then we kind of started refining some of the processes and the procedures and got it down to something that was somewhat scalable for the time. At the time we thought we were, we hit the jackpot. Then taking it to that next step of like, what do we do with all the data, right? How do we manage the data? The Big Chief tablet saying, okay, on pull tag 1, 2, 3, 4, I took 2 pictures, and trying to kind of backwards annotate that in the back room and manually creating folders. The good old days of data management with the drones. And then, back in the day, those drones, they didn't geotag the images. So how could we automate some of these processes? And I call it ghetto PPKing. But essentially what we were doing is we were pulling the flight logs and the CSVs off the controller and then matching the timestamps up to get a GPS location for that picture, and then automating it to the GIS map. So that was kind of the first kind of, hey, I think we're onto something here that's definitely going to be usable, definitely going to be scalable, and that kind of just took off like wildfire.
Yep. Very cool. Very cool. It's very, very similar to how I kind of got into the space. And it's funny that, you bring up linemen, and, the linemen we work with hate iPads and hand cameras. So trying to get them into drone technology, they're like, no, that's my hard limit. Yep. I'll figure out an iPad. I'll figure out how to use this camera, but do not make me control a drone and take photos. So very cool. When the storms went through Texas a couple years ago, were you still managing the co-op, the UAV department?
Yeah.
So how did you guys use drones in that situation? And, how bad did the storms affect you guys and your grid? And how did you guys use drones to do your damage assessment and kind of streamline getting power back on?
Yeah, we had a lot of line on the ground. And especially when you start getting into more of the rural areas, the established areas, if you will. So we kind of looked at the outage map and saw kind of where we had the most outages and kind of focused there. And then, next thing you know, is like each district was like, hey, we need them. And we got stretched thin real quick. So trying to kind of, task delineate there got fun. But we were flying with the storm stuff. We fly a lot different than we do for visual inspections, right? We're looking at it from a different lens. We're looking at it from a restoration lens as opposed to a maintenance lens. So typically we're flying a lot higher altitude. We're not necessarily hunting on, the ties and the cotter keys and the pins and stuff. That's kind of negligible at that point. We're going back to kind of the basic building blocks of the electrical system at that point. We're looking at, is the wire in the air? Are the poles in the air? We had a lot of equipment fail just because of the additional weight that the ice built up on the lines. We don't engineer our lines necessarily for that kind of that level of a weather event. So, being able to keep that higher altitude, let us keep that visual line of sight a little bit longer, not tremendously, but enough to kind of extend your typical visual inspection line of sight. And again, just covering as much line as humanly possible just to get that data back, to kind of aggregate it, to push it back to the war room. So we knew what assets we needed for where, right? When we started getting out towards our more western district, there's a lot of unimproved roads. They're just caliche roads out there, right? So we had kind of that initial freeze and the ice build up and some snow mixed in there, and then it kind of melted, and then we had a second wave come through. And so everything refroze. But on those unimproved roads, it just demolished them, right? So we essentially, pretty much any dozer we could find, we would have to take a dozer to every location. So we were sticking trucks left and right just because the ground was just a mess, right? So understanding kind of what taps were good and what taps had wire on the ground, what taps had poles on the ground, understanding kind of where those assets need to be routed and what they needed to get there, right? So like I said, eventually it got to the point once everything kind of melted again, everything just turned into soup. We couldn't get trucks into there without dragging them with dozers. So, that's a real time consuming process. If anybody's ever, seen a dozer operate, those things aren't speed demons, right? So unloading them off the low boy, dragging a truck in, coming back, getting another truck, dragging them in, that's a super time consuming process, especially when you start looking at folks that have been out of power for 5, 7, 10 days, right? so whatever we can do to expedite that, that's kind of where we focused, and understanding, hey, this is a light crew, right? All we need to do is get a small bucket truck in there to pick some wire back up, or hey, we need to get a boom truck in there to start changing some poles out. Knowing that ahead of time allowed us to streamline that response effort extremely fast, just because we had that information, that data to start making better business decisions. So that was a tremendous help from a restoration standpoint, just understanding what was where and not having the added logistics of, maybe having a guy walk that out or try to take a pickup truck and then stick in a pickup truck. And then the truck that comes to pull him out, he gets stuck. And now you've got this choo-choo train of tow straps and stuck trucks. And you're just like, man, this is a dumpster fire. Right. So,
no.
Those are some of the challenges that we were up against, initially in that ice storm. And then once we kind of got into the swing of things, and the biggest thing, and I still think to this day in the industry, the biggest kind of challenge that we consistently run into is how do we use the tool, right? It's an education campaign more than anything still. For folks like us, we understand the tools inside and out. We understand the use cases. We even start dreaming up, kind of mildly outlandish use cases. But, I think those mildly outlandish use cases become the status quo over time once that education piece kind of comes to fruition with these different, leadership positions at the utilities and understanding how the tools are used, right? I'll use an analogy, just like in Vietnam, right? When the sniper first became kind of, a tool in the toolbox from a battalion commander standpoint, a lot of them didn't know how to use that tool, right? So part of that sniper's job was to educate the battalion commanders on, hey, this is how we do what we do. And this is where we're super effective. And this isn't necessarily a good use case for us, but this is. So that education campaign, I think we're in the same space right now from an education campaign to everybody's starting to get, the drones are a lot more commonplace, in all the different verticals now. I think you're starting to kind of see that early majority to kind of, late majority kind of start coming to fruition here in the industry from a tech adoption cycle. And, with that, it's okay. We know that the tool is just overwhelmingly advantageous, but what do we do with it afterwards? And that's where, the guys that have, the ghetto PPK and experience can kind of start leaning on those experience and those lessons learned to kind of start educating some of the host utilities and the host companies on, hey, this is how we use the data. This is how it's beneficial. This is where you can really kind of improve stuff and start seeing the overwhelming benefit of integrating this tech into existing workflows.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I bet 8 years ago, it was mildly outlandish to think drones were going to perform any kind of inspection on a power line.
I think mildly is an understatement. I couldn't tell you how many districts I got laughed out of when I showed up with my little, 3 times crashed Phantom 2. And they're like, man, that thing's held together with bubble gum and duct tape. Like, yeah, got some Super 8.8 on it too. You just can't see it.
Yep. Now it's almost, I don't think it's quite there nationwide, but it's almost becoming industry standard as far as inspections. And from what I see, and I don't know if you guys see the same way, I feel like we're right in the middle of the shift of drones for being used for reactive maintenance to now it's starting to become proactive and more preventative maintenance.
Yep.
And so that to me, I see as a huge win for drones as a tool in the inspection side of the industry, and kind of slowly see the shift moving from West Coast to East Coast. I think the big players are doing it because they had the time and the money to R&D and invest in it and find the right pilots to run the programs. And you kind of see the West Coast and the East Coast slowly shifting to the Central. And,
yep.
I think within the next couple of years, it'll be a pretty routine thing, and it'll probably at some point be a pretty routine. I'm waiting on the DJI or somebody to come out with instead of the drone in a box, I'm waiting on them to come out with a compartment that'll fit on a bucket truck and just say, okay, before we send the guy up in the bucket, let's just go up and take a look at what we got here.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of that's because, a lot of the low hanging fruit, like the reactionary stuff, that's super low hanging fruit where there's like instant ROIs, right? Like, hey, I don't have to let an unsupervised apprentice walk this out. I can zip down it real quick and, hit a 2 or 3 span tap and come back real quick. But it's not there. It's the next one. or,
Yep.
whatever the case may be. And now that being scaled up to more of that, proactive approach. And then, I ran into the conversation that I had at the last utility I worked at was as soon as they started seeing a lot of that ROI come to fruition from those routine preventative inspections, then it was like, oh, well, we can also use it for this and this and this and this. And those handful of use cases all started surrounding that lineman having that tool in the field, right? So then it was like, well, let's put a drone on every truck. It's like, easy. Like, that is an option, but we're not there yet. Like, we need to work our way into that. We need to get more people trained to use the tool, and then we need to get more people, more of the leadership understanding how the tool is used and where it's beneficial and where it's not, because that's one of the biggest things. Drones are a very, very diverse tool that can be applied in a myriad of different use cases, but it's not a golden bullet. There are still very, very there's still some very good use cases where manned aviation is the better option, and understanding where that line of delineation is, and where the drone stops becoming the most effective tool and the manned aviation kind of takes over, I think is still a very important piece of that preventative puzzle, right?
Yep.
So yeah, I think with the adoption of the technology and the more mainstream, I mean, I see it on a lot of our customers' faces when, I kind of explain a handful of the basic use cases that are those low hanging fruit kind of points to where, hey, this is the quickest way to get that ROI back, to kind of build that momentum to start scaling. Right. And then when I see the light bulb go off in their head, like, oh, well, we can use it for this and we can use it for this. And now they're thinking of different use cases that are mildly niche, but hyper effective for their specific setup. Right. And then when I see that light bulb go off, it's like, all right, he's getting it. He's got it. Like, and then now you've got, that kind of that snowball effect of like, okay, we want to do it for this and this and this. And it's like, yes, let's do it, but let's prioritize some of this stuff. Right. Let's
baby steps.
Yeah. Let's not go straight to the moon. Like, let's just get to outer space.
Yeah, exactly. That's so funny. That's the same story at every utility that you start introducing this to. It's no. Oh my God, that's so cool. Yeah. Hey, you think we could do this, and hang on. Let's first do what we've been talking about for 6 months.
Yeah.
And then we'll start talking about other applications.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Let's hit the easy stuff, like stuff you can do like RGB and IR. Let's not just go straight to like corona detection and like a LiDAR. Like, let's ease into that.
Exactly. So what do you think sets you apart? I mean, I know you, and we've had a lot of conversations, so I have a pretty easy answer for this. But what sets you apart individually as having the journeyman background and being a director of utilities and flight operations in 2 different companies now, and then what also sets Firmatech apart from other DSPs in the space performing similar inspections?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, understanding the workflow is the biggest part, right? Oftentimes you see that natural disconnect because the FAA is the governing entity over the drones, right? So from a leadership standpoint, it makes natural sense to throw it in an aviation department, right? So it's very aviation oriented. I take a little bit different approach because, and I've kind of mentioned a little bit, the drone's just a tool. It's no different than a crescent wrench, right? Or a hammer or some Kleins, a shotgun stick, whatever the case may be. And if you start looking at it through that lens, now obviously, you got to follow the rules and the laws and stuff like that. Otherwise, you don't get to play the game, right? But once you get past that, then you start looking at it through a different lens of, hey, this is just another tool that collects super cool data, and what you can do with that data and how that integrates into not just one use case, but how can I take that one data set and amortize that across, 3, 4, 5 different business units inside of that utility to make that data extra usable for decision makers in all of those different, departments. I think that's one thing that initially starts setting us apart from other folks in the industry. And then, you take it another step farther, like we've been doing it longer. Firmatech as a whole has been around since the late 80s. And they were, back in early 13, 12, 13 timeframe, they were one of the first ones to put a drone in the air, right? So we've got some experience that ranges back, long before 107 was even a thought in someone's mind. So we've run into a lot of these hurdles and these roadblocks that that other companies, other DSPs are starting to get to. Back when we had a lot more flexibility, just because nobody kind of knew what was going on, right? Everybody was trying to get their sea legs about us. I think the experience kind of, speaks volumes for the application of the tool in the space. I think that's a definitive separator there from other folks. If you want to take that a little bit farther down the rabbit hole, being able to take the data and collect it in, like I said, 900 and something polls in a day, like that doesn't happen by accident. And that doesn't happen straight out of the gate, right? If I go down to Best Buy and buy a drone, I'm not going to be hitting those numbers out the gate, right? So I think that speaks volume to the experience, but also to some of the training protocols and some of the training aspects of how do I take, again, how do I keep that pipeline full of pilots that have the skills to pay the bills to hit, the 4, 5, 6, 700 polls a day numbers that you need to be, hyper efficient at your job. What we've kind of run into is kind of the opposite of what I think most folks initially think is, hey, we can come in and we can do a complete system inspection in a week or 2 or 3, depending on the size of the system, right? But that's not always the best option, right? If I'm being honest, that's rarely the best option. We've got that capability to do that if need be, but most folks don't have the internal support mechanisms to facilitate that much data coming across, right? So you almost are doing your customers a disservice by coming in and collecting too much data for them, right? Now I'm going to drown them in data, and now I've exposed them to a lot of risks that, hey, about everything. That's one of the downsides of the drone data is you get really good data and it allows you to do a lot of cool stuff with it, like correcting a GIS map or, doing some of the preventative inspection stuff, some degradation analysis, the LiDAR, right? That's still super cool to me. But everything that we're collecting is time, date, and stand, is geolocated, and you're providing photographic evidence. So with that, there's a lot of risk exposure that is involved with that process. And if you aren't cognizant of that going into some of these contracts, you leave a really bad taste in that host utility's mouth because they feel like they just paid you to screw them, right? And that's not the way you want your customers to feel at the end of the day, right? You want them to feel like, man, I'm really glad we brought these guys in to do these inspections and collect this data for us and give us these insights into what our distributed assets are actually doing and the condition of those assets in the field. So understanding that workflow kind of cradle to grave is, I think, imperative to setting up success because the technology is not slowing down anytime soon, right? With some of the automation stuff that's coming online and that's I think on the horizon of automating some of these inspections. And, the drone in the box solution is another one, right? You've got a handful of different companies that are hyper successful with the drone in the box in the substation environment, right? That's laying the groundwork for automating the inspections outside of the station, right? A lot of that's just getting the regulatory aspect caught up to where the technology's at, right? So as this technology allows us to capture the data a lot more efficiently, a lot faster, a lot more frequently, you have to be cognizant of that not every utility has a maintenance program or infrastructure set up to, one, ingest all that data, 2, make the repairs and prioritize all that data. So those are some things that you have to start thinking about when you start having some of these initial discovery calls of like, where's their palette for, do we do a full system inspection or do we kick that to maybe we only fly, a portion of the system or, maybe we fly just the transmission line this year and then maybe one feeder and just, ease them into it because like I said, a lot of these guys, they're late to the game, right? They don't have the, 8-10 years of experience like we do. So when they're trying to play catch up, they're drinking through a fire hose. So understanding that workflow and where those pain points are and where the breaking point really is in that workflow, and not letting that conversation get there, because once they get that aha moment, like, oh, we can use it for this and this and this and this, that really drives the gimme, right? I want more now.
Yep.
Kind of, it's counterintuitive from a sales aspect to kind of tell a customer like, let's pump the brakes. Like, we'll get there, but let's start small. Let's eat this elephant one bite at a time. And before you know it, we've got a pretty good chunk of your system inspection. And now we're looking at the second cycle through. So.
Yep. That's I think the biggest advantage I've seen in DSPs that are successful. They approach it from your side, not from a drone and aviation side, because like you said, they'll go in and, hey, we can fly 150 a day per pilot. We got 4 pilots. We're going to have 600 poles a day. We've got, a couple of guys on the back end doing this, and, cool. We've looked at 3,000 poles. Well, the problem is you might have 150 changeouts that are necessary from that. And they have 3 internal crews. So now they're at risk of not being within compliance. They knew about it. If something does happen in a 6-month period before they could get it changed out, now liabilities on them for whatever, it's just it's a snowball effect.
It really is, man. And that's one of those things, like when I go in and I start talking to some of these utilities, like, hey, let's do a small section first. That allows us to set the standard for expectations when we start scaling this. And that also gives us kind of a temperature of how fast do we need to scale this. Maybe we don't. Maybe we do 1/10 of the system this year, just because you don't have the resources. Like I said, a lot of times the ground line inspection for the longest time in this industry has been the gold standard. And with this new technology kind of disrupting that market, that's no longer the gold standard. And I think you're going to see kind of, and it won't be anytime soon. I think it'll take some time to kind of affect change from that standpoint. But I think, like, when you start looking at the co-op space as a whole, right? Ground line inspections is imperative for RUS funding. I think as you start seeing this adoption of this technology, I think you'll start seeing drone inspections becoming another standard for RUS funding, right? We're just not there yet. It's the technology and the adoption isn't there yet, but it will. We'll get there. But yeah, I mean, there's been a bunch of times, even on like small proof of concepts, I'll fly, 200, 300, 500 poles just to kind of prove out what we're going to see and kind of the quantity of, what we're going to find. And I come back on, and like, hey, here's 18 poles that y'all need to change out because they're like, there's Keebler elves making cookies in the top of that damn thing, right? So, you take that to the maintenance guy and say, hey, here's all the poles you need to change out. And they're like, no, we don't have, like, we don't have the resources to do that. And now I'm like, all right, well, appreciate it. Got to go, man. Like, trying not to get bare knuckle boxed in the parking lot as I'm rolling out. Right. So that's not the approach that's going to make DSPs hyper successful, right? It's working with the clients and understanding that again, that cradle to grave workflow, and then the tolerance for that is going to be huge. Right. So,
yeah, I think, like I said, I think that's what sets you in kind of, the upper echelon is you see it from that perspective where so many don't have that on staff to advise them not to do certain things.
You are going to get cussed if you do this.
Oh yeah. I've watched so many DSPs just fade out faster than they came in because they don't understand the market. They don't understand who they're working with. And, maybe you went in and schmoozed a director or an executive with your keywords and some of your flashy marketing. But when it comes down to the utilities director and the guys on the ground who have to repair all this stuff, if you're not on the same page with them, and if you don't see the entire field the same way they do, then yeah, you're, like you said, bare knuckles.
Yeah.
Better run.
Yeah. And I've worked around enough linemen. Those are not the dudes you want to box in the parking lot.
No. I've seen them all at the tailboards, and you could put 100 guys in a circle, and I can pick out the 20 linemen. Yep. So I think we kind of touched it just a little bit. You'd mentioned it, but what was your big aha moment where you knew drones are going to make a huge impact in our industry, and they're going to do it pretty soon. If there was one moment that really stands out, and it doesn't have to be the biggest moment, but
No,
just kind of the first one.
So it wasn't necessarily one individual. It was like the compounding of like that reoccurring, like, hey man, this is actually better than the way we've always done it, right? Like that phrase kind of, oh well, we've always done it this way, and it's just like little bits in me die inside, right? But the storm response to the pool line in 15, that was kind of like, hey, this is a super useful tool. And then we got hit the next year with 500-year floodplains again, back to back years, the exact same weekend. So that was kind of like, okay, those are two like very, very rare events. But in the meantime, we started fleshing out some other use cases for kind of day-to-day inspections. And one of those use cases, we started off with most utilities track all their safety, Katie, their reliability metrics, right? So I started digging into some of that data and say, hey, like, let's go to the worst performing feeder in all like 300 and something feeders that we had on the system. Went to the absolute worst performing one, and we flew from the substation to the first device. Super small amount of poles, but we got a lot of good pictures out of that. And I went back and I started looking at the data, and I'm like, I'm coming from the lineman perspective, right? I'm like, man, I built half this system. I know it's dialed in, right? Like there ain't nothing wrong with this. I had that lineman pride kind of getting in the way of some logic, right? Yep. Started looking at the data, and I was like, oh my gosh, I found way more issues, and I wasn't looking at the granular stuff back then, right? I wasn't looking at the lock nuts and the cotter pins and those real small details. I was just looking for insulators, ties, cross arms, braces, and pull tops. That's all I was looking for. So I was coming through with a super coarse comb, and I found way more than I expected. And so we're like, okay, made work orders for everything. Crews went out, started making the repairs, and I kept going on that feeder. And when I started realizing that the speed at which I can collect this data is always going to be faster than anything we can do from the ground, and coupled with the fact that I'm finding way more issues than I initially thought, because I was letting pride get in the way of logic, and not taking into some of those ambient conditions, those other factors that now I do take into account. That was kind of that real kind of aha moment to where it's like, okay, there are some very niche use cases where this is hyper effective technology, but what I don't know is out there that I now know about is absolutely terrifying, because again, I'm taking a worst case situation and now I'm applying that at scale. I'm looking at the sheer volume of work I have the potential to find in a very short amount of time. My mind instantly went back to, I don't have enough guys. Like there's not enough linemen. Like, and we're doing line extensions, and we've got contractors coming in. I mean, we're growing like wildfire at that point, right? We're essentially adding another co-op every single month to our meter count, or at least from an annual basis, we're adding a small co-op every year. So to keep up with the growth and then come back through and say, hey, like, we also need to keep up with the lines that are feeding the new growth. And how do we do that? And I don't have enough guys for that. So that was kind of that moment to where I was like, oh, wow, I'm going to have to be very careful about how I apply this tool. Otherwise, I'm going to be drowned in work orders. And again, that risk exposure now starts becoming a lot more of an issue. So we kind of backed up and punted and started looking at some different data points that we were able to extrapolate from that, and then start looking at, okay, maybe it makes more sense to start using this tool this way as opposed to this way, right? And let's work up to that paint with a push broom, that kind of Golden Gate Bridge kind of methodology, right? Yep. So that was kind of that real aha moment that was very rapidly followed by an oh shoot moment.
Yeah, that's I think again similar. I mean, we've all seen some of the news on the West Coast and then the Central with natural disasters, and I think everybody has had a similar aha moment that, okay, we can actually use these. Let's put them to use, and then whoa, let's pull the reins back in, because we need to learn how to most effectively use
Yep.
these, not just let them go.
Yeah.
So it's cool to see that, most of my work's been on either, Florida East Coast hurricane or California West Coast wildfire. So it's, polar opposites, but similar approaches. And you see Texas and some of the other central states, it's, ice storms and floods, but it's same approach.
Yep.
Nationwide, different grid, different reliabilities, different everything, but same approach to
Different root
the same
cause,
problem.
but yeah.
Yep.
Similar solutions anyways, which is good because that shows the versatility of the versatility. I promise I know how to use English. It shows the versatility of the tool, right? It
Yep.
really does have a super broad spectrum of applicability, and that's just with some of the like out of the box basic sensors, right? You don't need to go full send into some very niche sensors out of the gate. You can ease your way into it, and you can still provide a lot of value to any program with some pretty elementary drones with elementary sensors, and have an overwhelming impact on the reliability of the system, the restoration effort, again, that list just continually keeps growing. But that definitely lends to the versatility of the tool, which is great because there's, with the exception of maybe the crescent wrench that can be used as a hammer in certain situations, the drone having that versatility, I think, is great because it's one tool that allows a bunch of different departments inside of a utility to get the data that they need to make better educated decisions. And it's one tool. It's not, hey, this only works for vegetation, or this only works for, equipment maintenance. This only works for mapping, or this only works for, engineers. So I think that's one of those things that, again, lends itself to kind of pulling those reins back out the gate. Like, oh, whoa, we're way out over our ski tips here.
Yep. I actually heard probably the best analogy I've heard with drone and tool is, back in the day, guys used to climb and they had to climb poles. And when the boom trucks came out, it was such a game changer for guys having to climb, because now you get to go up in a boom truck and you're not worried about is my strap latched on, and do I have all the tools on my belt, because I can't, I don't have compartments in the bucket to hold everything. And so same thing, like you might have to have a CDL license to drive it. You have to be more aware when you are driving it, but it was such a game changing tool in the utility space. And kind of since then, drones are a similar approach. You have to go get certified to fly it. You have to abide by different rules and regulations, but the add-on value that it applies to making those informed decisions before you're up in a bucket truck or climbing up a pole, it just makes life so much easier.
Yeah, and that's actually my analogy that I think I said at Energy Drone Robotics Coalition a few years back. But you're absolutely, it's true, because that bucket truck was a headquarters bucket truck that was only lent out for special projects, and then as that tool got exposed to the people in the education of how to use it and the benefits of using it, started spreading organically throughout the organization. Then it was like, okay, each service center had one, and then each crew had one, and now every crew in every crew on every dock in the country has two or three of them, right? So that adoption cycle is going to follow. I mean, that's one of those things that, as a lineman, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, right? There's some stuff that's, if I can plagiarize, let's not say plagiarize, if I can borrow an existing process and repurpose it, then, that makes that adoption curve super, super skinny, right? The bucket truck's a perfect example. The one thing that I run into a lot in the industry is, oh, well, we've already got an internal program. It's like, great. That's fantastic. Like, you need an internal program, because it doesn't make sense for me to mobilize a guy and have him drive 3 hours over to come fly for you for a one-off kind of reactionary inspection. That's purpose built for your internal program. What doesn't make sense is for you to have one or two guys inspect your entire system on a cyclic basis, right? That doesn't make sense. So if I want to draw a comparison there back to not plagiarize, but repurpose an existing use case, the line going back to the lineman side of the house is every utility in the industry has their own in-house lineman, right? They are more of the member facing. They're the smaller jobs that are kind of, out there in front of the membership and the customers, with the Firmatech shirt or the whatever utility shirt on, right? Yeah. But in the background of that, you have the contractors that come in and do the heavy lift. They do the, 10, 15, 20 mile reconduct jobs that you don't want to bog an internal crew down. That same application is where I think the industry is going to end up at scale is, you're going to have an internal program for those reactionary inspections, those onesie twosie kind of inspections that need to get done sooner rather than later. And then you're going to have folks like us come in and we're going to do that heavy lift, that paint with a push broom where, we're flying, a 30-year system every year or every other year. Right. So that's where I think that same dynamic is going to follow the same adoption at scale is, I don't see internal programs as competition to me. I think that we complement each other really well. And I think that's where when you start looking at some of these DSPs getting started, I think that's where they need to focus at is, how can you force augment an internal program? Those are the questions you need to have the answers to when you go talk to some of these folks. Not we're competing against, flying poles. We're absolutely not. Because most of the time you've got like an engineer, a planner, and a lineman, and those are the internal pilots, right? Well, those guys have day jobs, for them to, for example, perfect example, for a lineman to shut down for a day and not build line or maintain line, which is his core competency, to go fly a line, there's a significant expense accrued there that otherwise doesn't necessarily need to be. But for small projects like, hey, we've had this line go out consistently over the last, 3-4 weeks. Hey, let's go have someone fly that. That makes overwhelming sense, right? But that doesn't make sense for us to go roll a guy, 3-4 hours down the road to fly 20 poles. That's not going to be, financially feasible. That's not logistically feasible. That just doesn't make sense, right? So those are some of the things that I think at scale, again, robbing Peter to pay Paul, I think we can repurpose that same framework that's already existed and already works at scale in the drone space. And I think that'll lend itself to some very good effectiveness in building and scaling some of these programs throughout the country.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you bring that up. So my dad's a city manager in Florida, and we've had this conversation so many times about, especially with construction and building line, is hey, I think they only have one internal crew. They're small. I think they have 1,200 distribution poles in their circuit, so it's not much. And he said the same thing. Hey, if we have an outage overnight, our guys are going to go and they're going to get the power back on. But if it requires construction or a pole replacement, and we're going to bid that out. We're going to have contractors come do it because they can do it, twice as fast for half the money. And that's what they do. They build these lines day in and day out. Our guys are there for, like you said, the facing of, we're doing this, whatever on Main Street, and, we want everybody to see City of Newberry, or, we have, power goes out in the middle of the night, or, a tree knocks a line down and we need to get back up immediately. We have an internal crew that can do those kind of things. So it's funny to hear that from somebody else. I don't really talk, you don't talk that or about that kind of stuff much when you're talking utilities, but
no, you don't. But it's 100% true, and I think that relationship needs to be there because, if I take an internal crew and say, hey, go run this rope rig, they're going to be like, man, I haven't run that since I was an apprentice. Like, that was years ago. I don't know what to do. Like, but if you tell a contractor, hey, go run that rope rig, and he's over there drinking coffee, just, flipping switches like Homer Simpson, right? It doesn't take any brain power to do because it's so ingrained. And that's, I think, exactly where the industry needs to get to. And the faster we can get there, then we can start focusing on other things like, automating some of these inspections and, getting good data back to, start training some of these algorithms to get them to where they're accurate enough to be mildly left unsupervised, right?
Yep. Yep. That's the end goal.
Yeah.
But kind of so, and I think you just explained the first part of this, was, where do you see the industry going in 3 to 5 years? And I think you kind of talked about, there's going to be DSPs, there's going to be in-house, and they're going to complement each other. But, if you have expansion beyond that, maybe not just in the utility industry, but outside of that, I know you guys do a lot of mapping and methane detection. Where do you see the industry in the next 3 to 5 years?
If I can make an assumption that the regulatory piece will continue to evolve at a pace, they've been really good at that for a government agency. They've been really good at keeping up with the industry for the most part, right? So we'll assume that the regulatory piece isn't necessarily a barrier to entry. I think it'll always complement itself, but we'll assume that there's no regulatory hindrance on the technology. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to see the majority of inspections be automated. And I think that you're going to have to do that from a price point, and not necessarily from a price point being the only reason. I think from a frequency standpoint, a lot of the drone in the box stuff, I think I'm real excited about those kind of technologies starting to get some legs and grow, because what that's going to allow us to do is fly whatever our target is more frequently, right? So now we're collecting that data instead of, every quarter, once a month or once a week or every day, right? And now you're tracking that data at a lot more granular level, which allows you to extrapolate even deeper insights, right? Right now, it's like, oh, hey, we fly the system once every 5 years. Well, you've got a 5-year gap in between looking at that structure, for example, right? Or that specific site that you're mapping. So with the technology becoming more automated and the drone in the box solutions becoming a lot more commonplace, I think that's going to start rounding out the automation piece, which is going to give the data required to train those algorithms. Right now, I know you kept a close eye and a finger on the pulse on some of the AI stuff, and I'll speak for myself, but the consistent theme that I get back from all these AI companies is we need more data and we need more reviewed data. And that's, I think, that first step to really refine some of the AI data review processes is flying stuff more frequently. And in order to do that, it's the drone in the box. It's having, a drone set up in a substation and flying it every single day, or having it fly a stretch of line every single day. That's going to give that data, or give those algorithms enough data to start really refining it down to where you're looking at, 90, high 90s percentile of accuracy. That is going to give at least me enough confidence to start trusting that piece of tech a lot more. Right. Just like with the sense and avoid capabilities with Skydio, right? I 1000% did not trust that the first time I flew. The first dozen times I flew. But the more stick time I got on that, the more I started trusting that sense and avoid technology. Then it kind of went from, okay, I don't trust this, so I'm giving like little manual adjustments because I don't trust what it's doing. And then once I kind of got that confidence and that trust in that tech, then it was like, now I'm using it to my advantage, right? So now I'm coming in hot on the top of the pole and using that sense and avoid as kind of a bubble buffer to say, okay, I'm in the right spot. So, I think that's kind of where the drone in the box technology is at today, and where it needs to get is getting that tech trusted to where we can automate this consistently and have, the history, the logbook of, hey, this is how many thousands of hours of operations that we've got with 0.0 problems, right? Okay, maybe the drone missed the dock one time, had to roll a guy out there to, set it back on the dock. Okay, if that's the worst thing that's happening in a remote operation like that, we're doing all right, guys. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
we're moving in the right direction, right? But I think in the next 3 to 5 years, you'll see a lot more of the inspections in all the different verticals, a lot more of that automated, and then which is going to lead to the frequency of which we're able to do it becoming a lot more frequent, which is going to kind of start feeding the data into other parts of that workflow that are just starving for data right now, just because of the manual processes on the front end, right? So I think that's kind of the near term next 3 to 5 years where the industry is going to start kind of really making some good moves. And then, after that is more guesswork, but
Yeah. I think, I agree with the next 3 to 5 years. That's going to be a big focus for a lot of companies. I feel like DJI is not talking about it, but I think they're going to come out and just say, by the way, we put a the same obstacle avoidance into a drone and put a good camera on it. Like I still, for the life of me, cannot and will not ever understand why Skydio won't put a decent camera on their drone. Like I get that it can avoid a lot, but if you put a good sensor on it, you'd really compete with the DJIs of the world.
Here's my perspective on that, because I agree. They're the sensors that they have on it are lackluster at best, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also keep in mind the perspective that they were looking at when they developed that platform. They were going heavy after DoD, which they got, right? Mm-hmm. That drone was purpose driven to go get in a gunfight with. When you're going to get in a gunfight, you don't need to see cotter pins and that level of detail. You're not necessarily mapping with it. You know what I mean? Like that's a force augment for a small unit tactic to get up in the air and get a personal ISR on station to go get in a gunfight. Mm-hmm. It's very effective at that. But as they start expanding out into other markets, and without getting too far outside of my lane here, they realize that. I've had some conversations with the folks at Skydio, and they're listening to the user feedback from the different verticals that they're trying to push into, and they're taking that and they're acting on it. But all of my guys that are, we run into those accounts all the time. Hey, we're a non-DJI account. No problem. We got Skydio. All right, perfect. Let's go. Understanding that, hey, their IR sensor on their X2 isn't anywhere near the same as, an M3T, right? But the feedback I get from my pilots all the time, like, man, it's hard to fly. It's this, that, and the other. It's like, well, again, it's not purpose built for what we're using it for. But that's how we continue to kind of push the envelope on some of this developing tech. Is I take tech that wasn't intended for its initial purpose and I try to break it using it for something else. And then I provide that feedback and say, hey, it would be cool if y'all did this, this, and this. And they're like, oh man, we never thought about that. Like, we didn't even think that y'all would use it for that. It's like, hey, I'm here to tell you, I will try anything twice and I will break it 3 times. So, that loop of feedback of taking it into a market that it wasn't designed for and then having folks just beat it up, then that's that feedback that is required to start making those evolutionary changes with the technology to get a platform that is 100% US made and has all the right sensors and capabilities, and just, something as simple as like hot swappable batteries, man, that's super cool, right? That's a great tech that, from flying all day, every day, especially on utility inspections, you land, you have to power the drone all the way off. And the most time consuming part of your day is waiting for the drone to boot. Well, if we can eliminate that, there's another 100 polls throughout the course of the day, right? So,
and the app's always a little glitchy when you first get back into it.
Yeah, it's mad that you shut it off, and then you get mad as a pilot. So instead of powering it down, you just jerk the battery out, right? How can I streamline this a little bit? Right.
I know. And now with the M300 and the Mavic 3 Enterprise, how they kind of batch it all per flight. It's like, hey, it's kind of nice to know I'm running this entire feeder line here. I had to stop. I can hot swap batteries and it's all still going to be compiled in this folder. Now it's a lot easier for me to organize data. And if I'm going to go, work on another feeder line or do a tap here, I'm going to land so that I can, start a new folder.
Yeah. No, it helps a lot with the data management piece, especially in the field, right?
Yep.
because the better you can organize the data in the field, the easier it is to unjumble in the back room, which
On the
makes
back
it,
end,
again, the more efficiencies that we can interject into our workflows, the more better we're going to get.
That's very true. And it's good to hear that Skydio is doing that, because I know that is feedback I've tried to provide for a while. And, not just from a utility standpoint, but we also do a ton of work. We do thousands of site scans a year in the telecom industry.
Yep.
And so T-Mobile and Verizon and AT&T and some of these guys are saying, hey, if there is anything to this whole DJI rumor, we need to start exploring options.
Yeah.
And so like, well, hey, what about Skydio or what about Parrot?
Yeah.
It's, you are happy with the quality you have, and you're asking how we can enhance the quality even better than what we have right now. And you're asking us to take 5 steps back by NDAA compliant or American made.
Yeah.
So I'm glad. I hope they do. I hope they put it in. I hope they're successful with it. And I hope they realize that there's a much bigger enterprise market than they probably initially thought, and said, we don't need to upgrade our camera sensor, and we don't need to include this and this, because this is what we're focused on. And, I even saw somebody post I think it was Harrison from Rock Robotic was like, hey, what would everybody think if I worked with Skydio to build an M300 style drone that could host, or that could hold and power up our LiDAR units? Man, that'd be incredible. Everybody'd buy it. For one, you never have to worry about running into anything. And for two, it's NDAA compliant, because I do think that that's still going to be a heavy topic of conversation. I think there will be more and more use or utilities that use that as their reasoning for not allowing DJI. Now, do I think the rumors are true? No. Has anybody proved it? No. Do I think it's stupid without proof? Yes. But I also know that Skydio and Parrot and all these other guys have, deep enough pockets to go say, hey, maybe you guys should look at this. And people in Congress are saying, well, we'll accept the donation and we'll take that into consideration.
Yeah. No, there's a lot going on there, and we'll connect offline, and I'll share some stuff that I think you'll find super insightful. But everything that I've seen so far has been, setting the groundwork for kind of that next evolution of applying the tech. And I think that, you have to have some foundational years of, hey, try it, get the feedback, and then make small adjustments, and then try it and then make this small feedback. I think if you leapfrog too far down, that you start missing a lot of stuff. And I think that's something that DJI did out the gate, was they were rushing for market share, right? So they started skipping a lot of that feedback and just upgrading little stuff here and there and pushing out a new version, and then upgrading stuff here and there and pushing out a new version. It wasn't until probably 17 or 18, I think, when I think DJI kind of had enough market share to where they could slow down a little bit and start soliciting some of that end user feedback, and then really taking that back to the engineer team and start implementing some of that into the next release. Right. So yeah, I'm encouraged about, all the different manufacturers. I think, they constantly are amazing me with, some of the new stuff that they're coming out with. We do a lot of R&D with some of the major brands, and we get to try to break it, and we get to provide some of that feedback. And I think there's been kind of a shift, especially over the past few years, of folks really, really wanting to take that end user feedback and interject it into their R&D cycle, and putting engineers in front of, guys like me that can talk their face off about how, this works great, this is hot garbage, this works great, this is mediocre, do this, make this better, do this. And they're really taking some of those feedback loops to heart, and they don't, if they don't get that information, then they'll never know what they need to improve. So I think that's something that, especially some of the industry leader folks like yourself, giving that feedback back and knowing that that feedback has some weight from experience and not just, I flew it one time at a conference and this thing sucks. Right. Those guys are abundant, right? That the other ones, the few and far between, are the guys that, maybe have racked up a couple hundred hours of stick time on a particular payload or a particular platform. And hey, this works really well. This not so much. It'd be cool if,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's cool that they're listening to feedback, because I still think even a year down the road, there's a lot of market that would make the switch.
Oh, 100%.
And I know if they got close, we would.
Yeah.
We would internally, we would do everything Skydio to be American made, to be NDAA compliant, and know that, hey, we're not far off with capabilities, but we have faith in you now because you've listened to all the feedback and you've given us everything we've asked for. So now, as we continue to use your product and provide feedback, we have faith that you're going to continue to develop this into, an enterprise level tool that we can all benefit from. And, it helps really everybody.
Yeah.
All industries. I think there's an application for it in all industries.
No, 100%. I know, like, that's been a hot topic with us, especially with the remote ID coming online. That's like, we've got, a huge fleet of P4Rs. Like, what do we do with those? Right?
Are you talking about the Phantom? Yeah. Is it just the standards or the pros?
P4 RTK?
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if the RTK did or not. I know DJI just announced the Phantom 4 Pro V2s and the Mavic 2 Pros. They were going to do by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Which doesn't help if you had to shelf up drones for a few months, but I'll have to look back and see if the RTK was included in that. I don't remember seeing it, but I have a hard time believing they're not going to include that one, because it was kind of their next drone after the V2.
Yeah.
And then I doubt, the multispectral they came out with later, but I don't know that was a big success for them. So
they tried.
They did. I think they did much better with the Mavic 3 multispectral, especially having the RTK module built in. It was or coming with the purchase. I think they did a lot better on that one. I know it's a hot item, and we can't keep them in stock. Like when we do get our couple from a shipment, they're already accounted for, and so it seems like they listened to feedback and did a little better, which is the one thing I will give them. I think for a little while with DJI, they, especially on their enterprise line, I feel like they didn't listen as much. They kept putting out, like, from the M200 series to the M300 series, and then it wasn't. They made improvements, but it wasn't the improvements that I felt like benefited us. But I will say, with the release of the M350 and making the TB65s, twice the cycle count for the life of the battery, and to where the TB60s and the 65s can both fly in both platforms, and the RC Pro can now go to the M300. I feel like they finally listened and said, okay, you guys are spending a lot of money. We're going to give you what you want. We're going to make the upgrades. We're going to make the, a better OcuSync and a better battery and the rapid charge case. I mean, to me, that's a big thing in the field, is the rapid charge with the 65s.
The batteries,
first time in years.
Yeah. The batteries are still one of those, like, weak points in that operation for us, because, we get, typically what we're seeing is about half the marketed cycles is where we're seeing. But I mean, we're flying these things hard, right? They're hitting the ground, and we're cooling them off as fast as possible, throwing them on the charger, charging them back up, throwing them back in a drone. So, we're running these batteries probably a lot harder than most they were intended to. But, with the 65s coming, that's I think something that is, again, listening to how we're breaking stuff, like where those failure points are from, using these drones, putting 200, 300, 400 hours on these things every year, and seeing where they break, That's that feedback, I think, is starting to get into that loop. And it's good to see that they're starting to, listening to how we're breaking it. And I'm pretty sure they're tracking it with the like DJI Care stuff. I think,
Yep.
they're seeing a lot of that metric. They're pulling a lot of metrics from what's coming back. Obviously, excluding operator error, which I imagine is still by and far the majority. Hopefully not with like the 350, because, that barrier to entry there isn't going to have, your regular Joe Schmo on the sticks, but
No, I think the 300 and the 350, you probably see fewer crashes on those because it's guys who are more experienced and guys who are using for your higher end utility inspections or your mapping stuff with the P1 or with LiDAR sensors.
Yep.
So it's guys who have been around the block. You don't just become a drone pilot, get certified, and dive right into LiDAR. It's not how it works. But
I've seen it done before. Not successfully, but I've seen it done before.
I've seen the money spent, and the constant posts in the forums of, hey, I just got my license, my FAA Part 107 license, and I bought an M300, and I bought a $50,000 LiDAR setup, and what's going on? I don't know why I can't get good data from it.
Yeah.
How do I get clients?
Yeah. And then I've also seen the dump truck full of boo-boo lip that goes down when they have an unscheduled landing.
Oh yeah. See, that's where I think if you're an experienced drone pilot, that is where you make your money. When something goes awry, you don't panic and you know how to safely navigate. Sometimes the drone's landing no matter what.
Yeah.
And you better very quickly figure out what's going on and where the safest place to land is without causing any damage.
Yep.
Because
find the soft rocks.
Yeah. I've had it happen several times. The first time it'll scare you to death, and then after that it almost
understanding what you can do with three props.
Yeah.
When you lose a prop, that's you can still do some navigating with three. You just got to do a little
separate the men from the boys.
Yeah.
If you can land it with three props, then
it's going to be a little harder than planned, but it won't be a total loss.
No. I fortunately have never ran into that, but I have had a prop break off like mid-flight. I think there was a stress fracture that I'd missed in a pre-flight inspection, and I didn't get too far off the ground. I was actually doing some training, and I got a little bit off the ground, and all of a sudden it started sounding a little different. I was like, let me land and see what's going on. So I landed it, and sure enough, like an 1.5 inch long chunk was just missing off the end of the prop. This was way back in the day with the Inspire 1.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, these things were a little brittle, but this is why you check props to make sure.
Yeah.
Even the smallest stress fracture with all those revolutions per minute, man, that thing can crack, and you don't want that to happen mid-flight, flying 100 or a couple, like 1,000 feet away from you.
Yeah. No, this is going to date me a little bit, but I had a unique H920, and I was doing a demo to all the head shed. All the chief seniors were out there and showing them all the capabilities, and look, like, we can go up, we get right on this, and we get good pictures of this and that, and did all my pre-flight like 2 or 3 times, because I'm like, there's no way I'm going to let anything go wrong when I've got all the chief seniors out here doing a dog and pony. And thing takes off, and the best I can assume is it happened on that initial thrust to take off is when it fractured. But same thing, one of those motor mount bolts fractured, and it had enough wiggle room, and that whole motor come loose mid-flight. And yeah, that got a little Western a little quick, but unscheduled landings happen from time to time.
It happens. It does. Well, we'll kind of wrap things up here. So real quick, how many employees, like W-2 pilots, do you guys currently have? And then, if things go to plan, how many do you think you'll add over the next couple of years as you continue to evolve?
So we've got around 20 to 23. They kind of fluctuate depending on workload. We've got about 20 to 23 pilots in house right now. W-2 pilots, all trained, all certified, all run through our internal program. I think in the next kind of 12 to 18 months, we're probably going to be looking at another dozen, if not more, bringing on board, just because of the work that we've got coming in. and we're going to have to ramp to meet those needs. So that's where I think, something like you've got going was kind of like, hey, if I have a place that I can go to and say, hey, these guys have checked, 95% of the boxes that I'm looking for, I can pull them in the driveway, no problem. I think that's extremely advantageous for someone like me that's, going to be continually look to scale the program.
Yep. Yep. Very cool. I didn't realize you guys are that big. I do have to ask, this is unscripted, because I know Daryl and follow him.
Yeah.
So what did the full send originate with you and he picked it up from you, or is that something you've picked up from him and all his social media posts?
No, I think that was him all the way, man.
Okay.
He's a beast on the social media, man. He puts out a lot of good content, and I love it. Always populates on the top of my feed because I'm always on there bird dogging what he's doing. So yeah, no, that I think the full send's more of a military thing, man. That he was in the military, and
Yep.
yeah, he's a team lead. He's one of our more experienced pilots. That guy definitely has the skills to pay the bills.
Yeah, I see a lot of the stuff he does, and I've chatted with him a few times offline, and he seems like he knows what he's doing.
Yep.
So, all right. So, last question: new pilots coming into the industry. What's the best piece of advice that you would give them?
Man, don't go up to real airline pilots in the airport and tell them.
My license looks just like yours.
Yeah. No, I would say, take the time. One of the biggest things, and especially nowadays that you've got, the fairly low barrier to entry price point for like the Mavic Airs and stuff like that, the $200-300 platforms. I would say don't go out and buy one of those straight off. I mean, obviously do because they're super fun. And it helps build those foundational skills. But take a step back even farther to a drone that is, a little $60 drone that has no automation. It's 100% manual stick flying skills. And you're going to crash that thing 1,000 times. But
Mm-hmm.
I will say that if you get good at flying that drone that has zero autonomy input, zero GPS, it's all you. That right there, once you get confident with that platform, when you make the jump to some of these um, more expensive platforms and something does go wrong, you'll have the confidence in your skills to manually fly that drone to a safe spot or manually handle the situation, right? Grab some altitude and problem solve, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
would say I see that a lot of times that guys get into the Mavics and stuff out the gate, which I think is fantastic. But also take some time and go get like a Cyma. I think it's like a Cyma XC6 or something. It's like $60 on Amazon. Get a dozen of the little batteries for it, charge them all up, wear them out.
Yep.
That I think is going to give you some of those foundational skills, those baseline skills that are going to give you the confidence when you get on an M350 with a LiDAR unit and not panic as much. You'll still have that pucker
Mm-hmm.
factor, I guarantee it. I've
Mm.
got thousands of hours on the sticks and I still get a little puckery when I take off on that thing. But having those baseline skill sets, again, master those basics. It doesn't matter if you look stupid flying cones and pool noodles and stuff like that out there. Really spend the time, really take the effort and invest in those base skills, because if you have a good core competency on those base skills, I can teach you to do anything else in the industry, and I can teach
Mm-hmm.
it to you fast.
Yep. I agree. I think coupled with all of that is learn industries. Don't just stop at learning drones. Learn industries and what drones as a tool provide, and get really good at that,
Yep.
and then diversify. Don't lock in on just doing real estate or just doing mapping. Diversify yourself,
Yep.
kind of like your pilots do. Your pilots, I see, do a lot of mapping stuff, do methane. I think Daryl just posted today, he's testing out some of the new methane detection stuff, and I know I see them go do utility inspections. And if you have a diversified portfolio, if one area is lacking, kind of like in the stock market,
Yep.
if one area is down, another area is doing, you'll stay busy
Yep.
full
You'll
time.
you'll always stay busy, and you'll always have applicability in and you'll be the first one on deck that we're going to call when we need to scale rapidly, right? If
Yep.
the more skills you have in your toolkit, the more applicable you're going to be, and the more jobs you're going to get, and that's ultimately kind of the name of the game. How can I get more jobs to get more experience, right, and more exposure,
Yep.
and the whole nine. It just kind of it's the snake that's eating its own tail at that point.
Yep. Yep. Very cool. Well, thanks for joining me today, and
Yeah.
had a great conversation beforehand, and enjoyed everything here. I think ton of valuable information here, especially if you're looking at getting into utilities and seeing things from a utility director point of view. This is probably the best hour and 15 minutes that you've spent in the last year learning. So thanks for joining us, and we'll keep up with you, and we'll chat again soon.
Appreciate you having me, Kyle.
Yes, sir.